Chapter 1. The Beast and the Thing. I'd been ice fishing at the time, trying my damnedest to get myself a meal for the day, but having little luck. I was on the ice for so long, the cold had begun to bite my fingers, turning the skin first a painful reddish color before they faded to a numb, waxy yellow. I lit a pitiful fire on the shore after storing my gear away under the ice tent, being sure to travel back every so often to chip away at the ever-creeping ice that tried to cover my little fishing hole. It was then, as I began to regain excruciating sensation in the tips of my fingers, that he decided to make my acquaintance. I suppose it was at this moment that I should have suspected some strangeness. After all, it was the dead of winter in northern Hentan, and he was striding about on the ice with neither fur-lined shoes nor proper coat, and yet this was not what disarmed me. I had simply watched, slack-jawed, as he moved my ice tent out from over the hole, grabbed my own bait and rod, and lowered it into the sea, casually using his bare hands to steady himself as he knelt onto the solid ice. He braved the wind without a shudder, hardly blinking as his blonde hair was blown in and out of his vision. I wondered if he even knew I was there, but the few sideways glances he'd thrown at me were enough to let me know that he wasn't merely adopting a thought-to-be-abandoned fishing site. He was stealing my stuff. Having hardly overcome my shock and with no sort of plan, I lurched across the ice, sputtering thoughtless words and waving my arms as if shooing off some wild animal. I must have looked ridiculous, like some sort of fanfaring bird from the tropics who must intricately dance to impress its mate, but I didn't care. My own image was of little importance. In this moment, I was focused on the smug plunderer upon the ice. He shot me a blank expression, showing neither unease nor concern for my animated locomotion. This made me angrier, and I finally managed to shout something coherent as my feet met the ice. "You rat bastard!" Those were the only words that had managed to pass my lips. In the heat of my ire, I'd forgotten to slide my feet to traverse the treacherous, frictionless ice. One step was fine, but my second had my feet flung into the air over my head before I could choke out a surprised yelp. I felt my head crack on solid ice. Then, nothing. Was it a miracle that I'd lived? Hell fucking no. Was it a miracle that I'd fallen? Maybe. But at that moment, a blackness had consumed me in its entirety, throwing my thoughts into shambles. I couldn't quite recall certain things about myself during this time. Feverish images flashed across my blinded vision, making very little sense. A dying mother, stale bread, mold and maggots creeping up a forgotten slice of fruit, a grand struggle for wealth. Hunger. Fucking hell, there was so much hunger. This cryptic fairy tale had no hero to be found and no protagonist aside from myself, yet I couldn't recall who that was yet. The sun had long since made its way beyond the horizon. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't even aware that I was staring at the sky at first. All I could see was a mangled twist of bare branches against the navy blanket of night. Smoke was floating upward from somewhere beside my head, and I found myself glancing aside to see the roaring fire that had been built, as well as the man who sat hunched beside it, still chewing a cooked fish from the ice. We stared at one another for quite some time, the silence ever intrusive and awkward. After a very long time, after the gentle crackling of the fire had roused my spirit from confusion to vitriol, I sat up to shout again. He spoke first.
"Did you want some?"
he asked, his mouth still full of fish. He swallowed heavily, crystalline eyes boring into me from across the fire.
"Give me back my stuff!"
I could hear my voice echo across the lake, and the man grimaced in response.
"Okay, easy. Your stuff is right here."
He gestured to a bundle beside him where he'd piled my things. There was very little effort into making the pile neat. Moved by my frustrations alone, I stood up, shaky at first, but refusing to falter. It was the middle of the goddamned night, and I had to go home with no food. I grabbed my things and socked them away, securing my fishing rod and ice picks to my belt.
"Thanks for nothing, asshole."
I spat at him, stomping off away from the lake and back into the woods.
"Is your home that way?"
He called after me. I ignored him. I heard him stand up.
Don't follow me.
I warned. The bastard had the gall to speak over me.
I wouldn't go that way.
It was a warning. I took it as a threat.
Why? You gonna steal more of my stuff? I know how to get home. Goodbye.
I hoped my firmness would shake him off. In a hollow voice, still walking evenly behind me, he spoke.
It's gone.
A fearful sharpness like an icy blade pierced my chest, breaking off and lodging itself in my heart. It did not melt. It sapped every ounce of heat from my being.
What do you mean?
I hadn't meant to ask. I didn't want to know.
It's gone. The village?
The spike of ice held strong, but the piercing cold began to fade into fearful pain.
What do you mean?
I repeated, breathless with... I couldn't even pin down the emotion. I was afraid and extremely angry. In fact, it was taking every ounce of strength I had available not to blitz attack this stranger and take off running. I could see the scene clearly in my head. I could leave this rover here weeping in the snow and take off back towards the village, my heart pounding, lungs working overtime as I sprint in between the trees until I finally reach my village. It would be the same as I left it, and I could safely explode with rage, knowing that this abhorrent stranger spent his night fucking with my head. I could always go back and kill him tomorrow. My preemptive rage moved me, and so I decided to skip the violence for now and instead jumped straight to the running. I knew I would find my village just as I left it. This was a sound certainty in my mind. The run went worse than I had imagined. My stomach was empty, so I became breathless before I even approached the halfway point. The ice-coated tree branches scraped my face, leaving stinging, punishing red marks on both of my cheeks. My feet already ached from the day's work, so running on them removed any hope of comfort I could have had. Additionally, my head was still pounding from the blow it had taken on the ice. All in all, I would not recommend repeating my actions after having the sort of day I'd had. As I ran, I could hear his voice echoing chaotically between the trees.
Hey!
He called.
Slow down! I told you it's gone!
He sounded remarkably calm despite the booming volume of his voice.
Shut up!
I snapped back, but it fell out of my lips breathlessly instead of the harsh shout I wished to produce.
Come back! It's dangerous!
The word dangerous echoed around me, filling my ears to the point that I could no longer take it. I covered my ears, but the word still sounded in my mind clear as a bell.
Stop!
He boomed, his words making my mind overflow and forcing me to halt in my tracks. I was glad I'd opened my eyes and stopped. Hardly a stone's throw in front of me, the forest ended. I stared ahead in disbelief of what I was seeing. A brand new landscape opened up before me. A massive cliff, sheer as a razor, plunging down, down, down into a milky void of distant fog. A hot draft lifted from the newfound crater in the earth, smelling of sulfur and rotten flesh. I fell onto my backside, scrambling away from the edge. This hole was so massive that I could not see the bottom, nor the far left, nor the far right, nor the opposite side. They all disappeared into oblivion. Everything I knew, my home, my friends, my fucking cat, was just gone.
What the fuck?
I gasped, finding myself grasping harshly at the arid dirt under my palms. I couldn't accept what I was seeing. Inexplicably, he was standing beside me. Had he been running after me the whole time? He wasn't even out of breath. I noticed that he was carrying my bag. I'd stupidly left it behind during my mad dash to make it back to the village. Calmly, he set my things down by my side. I flinched almost unconsciously. Had he done this? Was he responsible for such carnage? Where did he come from? What was he? I really stared at him for the first time since we've met. He looked strange. His eyes were too sharp, his body too clean. He wore a disheveled suit, something that you'd only see in the city, but we were leagues into the mountains, days from any sort of civilization other than my village. And there he was, looking as though he'd just walked out of some fancy parlor. Why didn't I notice this before?
Who the hell are you?
I whispered, listening to my voice shake. Whether from fear or anger was unimportant.
I didn't do this,
He said, sitting down beside me and staring ahead into the crater.
if that's what you were wondering.
I had.
Then who? A monster.
He chilled me again with his ice-like words. I had heard of such a beast before, one with an insatiable appetite for ground and home and child alike, one who swallowed souls and feasted on whole civilizations.
Is this
I didn't want to say it. I couldn't believe it was real.
the gullet beast of Arisardo? What? No!
He snapped, standing up and crossing his arms in a sudden fuss. I cocked my head to the side. His reaction was so strange it knocked me out of my shock briefly.
What do you mean, no? Isn't this what it does?
My question was met with a dramatic eye roll.
No, he doesn't eat whole villages. Geez, what do you think I am, some kind of freak?
He asked, straightening out his suit pejoratively. I stared at him for a long moment, blinked, and let my mind slowly fill in the gaps.
You?
I asked eventually.
Yep. The gullet beast. Yes. Of Arisardo? Yeah.
We stared at each other. No other words flowed from my mouth or his. The two of us had been sitting beside a fire for hours. The updraft from the nearby crater kept our embers smoldering well throughout the night, but neither of us spoke, nor did we move to lay down or rest. We stared at one another, blinking occasionally, saying little with our mouths, but much with our eyes and infrequent sniffles and coughs. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with my head pressed against the icy soil beneath me. Dead leaves caught in my hair as I sat up rapidly, chilled to the bone. The fire had kept us warm for most of the night, but he was gone. I scrambled to my feet, swiveling my head around on high alert. When I faced the village, I found that the crater was gone. The ground was gently sloping, covered with the delicate frost of morning, just how I remembered it. Before I could think, I took off running, hardly even noticing the buttery grin that was now spread wide across my face. I never knew I could be so happy to be back in this place. The wretched houses, bowing from wood rot and shuddering against the weight of the wind and the snow of the north, had always disgusted me, but as I approached, I'd never been so glad to see them.
Gianna!
I called out, my voice echoing off of the desolate homes. I wished to see my cat, my neighbors, the strong blacksmith who lived across the river from me, who I'd often eyed at night. But as I rushed throughout the village, I noticed that no one was about. Normally at sunrise, Haiti would have been out chopping wood for her brother, and little Bear and Brower would have been terrorizing their poor parents. There would be noise. Here, there was silence. I stupidly ignored the lack of sound, wishing only to see dear Gianna. She must have been waiting all night for me to light the fire for her. When I entered my home, it was strangely colder inside than out. The frost bit at my fingers and crawled into my lungs, forcing a cough from my chest as I entered. The early morning sunlight was unable to penetrate my home through my single west-facing window, so I squinted as my eyes tried to adjust to the dark. The door shut behind me, slamming with wind-blown force. I turned and stared for a moment, trying the knob only to find it was stuck. This damn thing, I thought naively, always gets jammed. I heard some scuttling from the other side of my room and turned around. Inexplicably, my hearth had roared to life with a spitting, smoking fire, but it brought me no warmth. Another burst of rustling from the far corner drew my attention away from the fire. As my eyes adjusted to the murky darkness, I made out a figure standing in the room. It was double the height of the ceiling above it, and so it hunched down unnaturally, reaching out from behind black robes with spindly fingers, gnarled and dark as obsidian. Its robes fluttered around it like thick smoke, choking out all my thoughts with their pungent odor. I could neither run nor hide, neither avert my gaze nor cry out in horror, for now that I could see it, It could see me as well. Its strangled posture led its head to be lowered directly over mine at a pervasive angle, filling my eyes like a great gray sky of storm. I could see nothing but blackness behind its hood, but it drew up its great hand to push the hood aside, and I gazed upon its horrible countenance. Flattened, gray sand stared back at me, structured at first, but soon crumbling away wetly. The sand fell into my eyes, and I blinked it away as it burned at my pupils, finally unfrozen. It was all I could do to let my fear out in a hollow scream as my heart seized in terror. My shriek filled the room like a flood, rising quickly from floor to ceiling and drowning out all else. The creature before me reeled away, releasing an odd shriek as it covered where its ears would have been if it had had any facial features. It lunged its arm out towards me and, in horror, I sat straight as an arrow from where I'd been lying in the leaves. My blood was rushing through my veins at the speed of a falcon, warming the extremities of my body, which were dusted with frost. The realization that my fear had all been a dream came slowly, and it took me staring into the bottomless pit beside me for a minute or two to realize that this was my reality, not the dream world.
What'd you see?
A voice asked, rich and endlessly casual. Oh, I thought sourly, feeling my expression twist from fear into a jagged glare. It's him.
What are you talking about?
I snapped back, rising quickly to my feet. I wanted to pretend I hadn't had that nightmare.
Your dream.
He explained, seeing right through my deflection.
It seemed pretty scary to me. I want to know what you saw. That's none of your business.
I snapped, pulling my pack nearer to the fire. The flames had died down to just tiny things during the night, but they still smoldered valiantly, giving us both a well-needed sliver of heat. I pulled my pack out from under me and fluffed it a bit. I had been sleeping on it, flattening the sparse contents. Before we did anything else, I needed to go through my things to account for what I still had. The only way to survive in the north was with gear, and I had very little of that right now.
Actually, it is.
He loomed over me, looking down as I placed my hand on the latch of my bag but did not open it.
I'm after the thing that ate your village.
I rolled my eyes.
What, you want an autograph? I want to kill it. Oh, right. How exactly are you going to kill...
I paused and gestured vaguely towards the massive pit.
That! It's already weakened, but only until...
You know,
I've heard enough of your bullshit. Why don't you peddle this as someone who believes it?
I lifted my pack and started to walk off.
You're not getting it. You can't leave yet. Hey!
He called, rushing after me and standing right in my path. I was about to deliver that harsh kick to the ribs I'd been saving.
Leave me alone. It can leave me alone. It can travel.
I wound up as far as I was able before unleashing a kick, precisely targeted to go straight up his ass. He caught my leg with very little effort, only an inch from his crotch. He hadn't even flinched. Despite my strong desire to write him off as some whack job, the look of serious sincerity in his eyes once again made me doubt if he was truly human. There was an inherent need to believe he was the beast he claimed he was.
It can travel through dreams,
he said sharply.
After it eats, it needs to lie dormant to digest. That means it's vulnerable, so it ran away into your dreams.
He paused, and I said nothing.
It wouldn't normally do that since it kills everyone in each village it eats. Usually it just lays at the bottom of its pit where nobody can reach it. There's a bottom, but you somehow got away from it. Nobody's done that before. Not ever.
He took another long pause. I didn't feel like speaking unless I was interrupting him.
Now, what did you see in your dream?
His question hung heavy in the air. I hardly knew how to answer him. What kind of fucked up disaster did I get myself caught up in? And then I told him. You would have too. His earnestness was too tempting, his requests too forward. I explained that I'd been looking for Gianna, and that none of my fellow villagers had been about. I told him about the way my door slammed shut behind me, locking into position right before my hearth flamed to life. Then I told him about that horrible thing in its black robes with its face of sand. I told him about how it hunched over me and crumbled. But I did not tell him that the sand had fallen into my eyes. He paced back and forth contemplatively.
How long will he be, in my head?
My words were jerky and awkward. I didn't even know what to ask under these peculiar circumstances.
How big was your village? Small. Maybe 30 people?
It was a rough guess. I wasn't friendly enough with everyone to know their names. Hell, the only ones I could recall by name were Haiti, the obnoxious twins, and the lumberjack, Samel. My chest ached momentarily for them. The beast looked at me closely, seeming curious.
You lived in a village that small and you don't know how many townspeople you had?
He asked, his tone accusatory. I glared.
What about it? It's just unusual, that's all. Very unusual.
His repetition pissed me off.
If you want to say something, say it.
I snapped. Slowly, he turned back towards me and released a tense sigh.
Nothing. It's nothing. If your village was about 30, it won't be in your head for long. Maybe another day or two.
I set my pack down heavily after he spoke, disgruntled that I'd have to deal with this thing for another few days. I shoved the thought away for the time being. I needed to check my stuff.